Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to the Family Education Series with Self-Determination, the practices of self-determination in youth and young adults with Dr. Evan Dean and Cassidy Job. Cassidy Job is a parent advocate of two teen boys who are both on the spectrum. She is also a LEND graduate and the executive director of Summit Future Foundation, which is a local nonprofit organization that empowers youth and young adults with developmental disabilities to achieve a meaningful life in their community. Along with Dr. Evan Dean, he is an associate director at the Kansas University Centers on Developmental Disability. He is an occupational therapist who has served adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the community for over 10 years. His research focuses on promoting self-determination and supported decision-making to help individuals with disabilities to live, work, and play in the community with everyone else. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Evan Dean.
Thank you, Stephanie. Well, I'm excited to be here talking to everybody tonight. I'm on a cord here, so I'm hoping that I don't knock over the camera. But I make no guarantees. So for the people online, if we cut out for a little bit, it's because I got too excited and walked too far. But we'll be back online shortly. But I really appreciate everybody taking the time to tune in to talk about self-determination. I think it's a really important topic for all youth, but especially youth with disabilities who often haven't had opportunities to have experiences that foster self-determination. And we'll talk a lot more about what that is. And really we're going to kind of focus on practices and ways that parents, in particular, since we're talking to families, can help promote self-determination and also what it looks like in schools. So I'm really excited to be talking to you about this tonight. And also want to give a big shout out to Cassidy, who's going to be talking in a little bit. I learn a lot from talking to family members and parents about how just the experiences that they have with their kids and how they are really working to promote positive futures for their kids. So I'm excited to learn more from Cassidy also, so it'll be great. So really kind of what we want to accomplish in this session is to really, we'll talk a lot about kind of what self-determination is. And we'll get into a little bit about how we can measure self-determination, and there's some online tools that parents can use to both assess their child's perspective of their self-determination and also their own family member perception of self-determination. So we'll talk a little bit about those tools that are available, and also some interventions that we use in both school and the community that can help promote self-determination, and then also positive career outcomes and transition outcomes, academic outcomes in school also. And then really I'm hoping that everybody can leave here today with some practical ideas on both how they already promote self-determination and also some plans for other ways that they can enhance self-determination with their children with a disability. So I'm not making money off this on the disclosure thing, so that's good. So I want to kind of start from the beginning to just kind of frame this discussion around self-determination and kind of where these concepts come from.
You here for the self-determination?
I don't think this is right. Looking something about disabilities, transition, autism.
For self-determination?
Yeah.
Come on in. You're in the right spot.
Nice. If you sit up front, you'll be on the video. So.
No, we're good.
All right. Thanks for coming. So I want to kind of start by framing this topic to really talk about a model of disability that is larger than our typical view on disability, which is kind of that there's a problem inherent in the person that needs to be fixed, which is how disability is viewed in a lot of settings and kind of thought about. And we take a different approach to that, to really think about disability as this mismatch. So we can kind of think about a person, and we think about a person with the skills that they have, and their dreams for the future and what they want to do, their strengths and interests. And that person lives, works, plays in an environment. And that environment may or may not match with the person's capabilities and support needs. So, and an easy example is, if there's a child who wants to be in a classroom with his typically developing peers, but maybe really sensitive to noise, and the classroom is loud. So you have a child who can learn, play, and everything alongside the children unless it's loud and they're in a loud classroom. So that provides a mismatch between the person and the environment. So the person has trouble functioning in that environment. And what that causes is, or what happens when that happens, is that there's a need for support. So there's nothing really wrong with the child, but there may be some ways we can support the child, maybe through earplugs or something like that, or teaching the other kids about creating a quieter classroom, some things like that. But those are all ideas of support that we can use to help that child be in the classroom and be successful in the classroom. And so related to self-determination, a lot of times a kid may have the capability to, has dreams, wants to do things, but may not either have the opportunity to develop the skills needed to do that, or the opportunity to make the decisions that are going to get them to where they want to go. And that's another way that we can provide support in between, support to provide those opportunities, help the kid develop the skills that they need to get to where they want to go. Did you have questions? Okay. So when we talk about self-determination, the thing that we're really, the kind of general definition that we use is that being self-determined means acting or causing things to happen in your life. It's something that resides within a person, and people have different levels of capacity for that, and different levels of opportunity to develop that. But it's about a person making or causing things to happen in your life. So it's different from being independent, because we really think about people being interdependent. So all of us need different types of support to do the things that we need to do. So being self-determined, can mean doing things that they need to do, but it can also be mobilizing our supports, figuring out who we need to ask for help to help us achieve the goals that we want to achieve. So self-determined action is characterized by three things related to this. That the action is what we call volitional, and that means that it's initiated by the person and enables the person to act autonomously. So again, being initiated, it could mean asking for support. It could mean doing something, but it doesn't necessarily mean being independent. And that action is also agentic, which means goal-oriented, that we all have goals, and this is really about people progressing towards their goals. So I hear differentiate this goal orientation a little bit. That my practice has mostly been with adults with intellectual disability, and I'll work with people who say they're supporting self-determination when a person who may be pre-diabetic or something like that is drinking, making a choice to drink a whole bunch of Coke every day. And people are saying we can't stop that because they're being self-determined, and we support self-determination. But it's a difference between, like the person's not setting a goal to be pre-diabetic or to do, they drink Coke because they love Coke, but it might be a way that we could support the goal orientation to be healthier, if that's what the person's really trying to do, maybe to educate them on, drinking sugary drinks and ways that they could be healthier, maybe drinking smaller amounts or something like that. So this idea of being goal-oriented is really important in these ideas of self-determination. And also that these are enacted with a belief that change is going to occur. I'm going to set this goal and I'm going to work to achieve it. And I may not achieve that goal, but I believe that the actions that I'm making are moving me in that direction. So we've asked people with disabilities what their views of self-determination are, and these are some quotes from people. I choose where to live. I like my job. I like what I do. I go to church on Sundays. I have family. I go to visit my family very often. So being social is very important to this person. Working is important, and these are things that they get to do. So they're feeling self-determined because they're doing the things that they want to do. And this person really highlights advocacy as a piece of self-determination, that they're able to advocate for themselves and others, which is a key part of self-determination. And I really like this quote, that to this person, self-determination is being able to talk about what you want in your life, to set goals and dreams for yourself. You have to do something or you won't be nothing at all. So I really like that idea of just being really goal-oriented.
And that's for all of us. That's not just for an individual with a disability or autism.
That's a really good point. Stephanie said that these ideas are really for all of us. It's not, and I agree that these ideas of self-determination are not just about people with disabilities. These are about all of us. I think and they're talked a lot about in the general population. I think we talk about them a lot more in the disability world, I think because these things become second nature to a lot of us because we've had the opportunity to develop some of the skills that we're going to talk about related to self-determination, and it's something that just through, being a young adult, rebelling against our parents, doing all the things that we all did, and graduating from high school, learning, doing different activities, working. That self-determination is something that has emerged for a lot of us without us really having to think about it. But for people with disabilities who maybe haven't had the opportunity to have a lot of these experiences, or maybe had the experiences but in a way where they've been over-supported to not really be able to try things and fail or to problem solve their way out of a situation, or that they may just need a more structured way of learning some of these skills, that we talk a lot more about these things because we've seen that they haven't developed the way that they have for other people. So we talked about these skills that are associated with self-determination. I want to kind of go through some of these because I think these, for parents, I think this thinking about some of these skills is really important to think about ways that parents can support self-determination at home and ways that you probably already are. But I think it's really nice to be aware that we're not just providing choices for our kids or different kinds of things, but we're doing this to a larger end, that they're going to be more self-determined by developing these skills and providing these opportunities early in life. We kind of start talking about self-determination in terms of transition, and ages 14 to 16, and I think there's a perception that we get to that age and we start doing self-determination so that the person's ready to have a job or ready to graduate or whatever it is. When really, for all of us, these things start very early. Even with very young kids, they start to make choices between different things and start understanding the consequences between choosing one thing and then not choosing another thing. So we can kind of see that a lot of these are in kind of developmental order, that we usually make choices before we really think about decisions. Decisions as kind of weighing the consequences between different actions and choosing one of those that's most appropriate for us. And then problem solving, goal setting. These are things that, biologically our brain become more ready for some of these through adolescence and adulthood. But we set the stage for that early on by providing structure and opportunities to try these things. And I think as we go along, Cassidy and I'll provide some examples of how we structure these things also. Oh. And kind of what Stephanie was saying earlier also, I think it's really important to point out that all of us benefit from support in these different things. There's a lot of goals that I set that I know that I can't do alone. So this idea of support is something also that's important for all of us. So in practice, we've kind of identified 3 ways that we can use ways that we can support self-determination. Kind of starting with we've developed ways of teaching these skills related to self-determination that we talked about earlier, that are the choice-making, decision-making, problem-solving, goal-setting. And here in a little while I'll provide an example of an intervention that we've used extensively in schools and also some in the community also. And then again, just providing opportunities to use and practice these skills. Some of the early research in self-determination showed that when people with intellectual disability were moving from institutions into group homes and back into their homes, just that move provided more opportunity to make choices about what they were going to have for dinner, what their rooms were going to, how they were going to decorate their rooms, where they were going to go during the day, and just by providing those opportunities to make those kinds of choices, change things around, see what they liked, that self-determination increased from doing those things. So I know a lot of those opportunities for choice making and things like that are kind of built into families' routines anyway, so just know that that's a way that we're supporting self-determination. And then always being sure that we're realizing that we're not just sending kids out to do things. Like all of this is with the appropriate amount of supports and accommodation. And I think it's I think an important point with this is that it is like really thinking about the amount of support that a person does need, because I think we can limit self-determination when we provide too little, such that a person tries and just routinely can't accomplish it because the right supports aren't in place. But also when we provide too much support, kids eventually realize that they just don't have to try and things are going to get done anyway, and that's not helpful for developing self-determination either. So really figuring out what that support is for each individual is an important component of that. So I think I think it's important to take a step back and think about why self-determination and why do we care about self-determination and building these things. And I think as we talk about some of those skills, it can become a little, I mean, I think it's obvious that some of those things just support our daily life and get us to where we want to go. But also we've done, over the years, we've done a lot of research that has shown that developing self-determination, particularly in school settings, that we've seen greater academic achievement, progress in the general education curriculum, and increased adult outcomes. So even when we intervene in school, we see greater employment, independent living outcomes, quality of life outcomes several years after school when we follow kids after that. So focusing on self-determination can be really powerful for people in terms of the kind of adult outcomes that we want for kids. So I want to talk just a little bit about how to measure self-determination. So for people that are interested in learning more just about their kids' perception of their self-determination, there are places online where you can go to take an inventory of self-determination to get an idea. So it's called the SelfDetermination Inventory, and there's a student report that asks the student questions about how they feel about their ability related to self-determination. So it's 21 items. It doesn't take very long to complete, and it's been validated for kids from 13 to 22. And it's in the process of being validated for adults also. So that's in the process. Some of the cool things about it, I'll show you a little bit here on the screen. You can see the authors added in a lot of pretty cool cognitively accessible things. So instead of just like rating on a 1 to 5 scale, you can slide the blue line over to the point where you feel like your self-determination to answer the question. So the first question is, I have what it takes to reach my goals. And you can slide that blue bar over as far as you feel like you answer that. There's also little blue arrows after the question. If you click that, it'll read the question to you for people who are more comfortable receiving auditory input instead of reading things visually. And then on some of the questions, it's hard to see on the screen, but the third question, I consider many possibilities when I make plans for my future. Possibilities is underlined. So that may be a hard word for people to understand, and if they click on that, it provides a definition of what possibilities means. So it's just some cool kind of cognitive features that have been built into the assessment.
And where can this be found?
That's a good question. So if you have the handouts online, self-determination.org, which is at the top of the screen here, is where the assessment is.
Stephanie's going to link it in the comments.
Oh, cool. For those on Facebook, it's being, Stephanie is linking it into the comments there, so you can have access to that website. So the neat thing about this too, if you do it, you end up with a score at the end, an overall score of self-determination, which is interesting. But to me, the other interesting thing is that you can see down at the bottom there's three bars. So you receive an individual score for volitional action, agentic action, and action control beliefs, which is really interesting. So if you think about agentic action, which is that goal orientation, there are people who are really good at setting goals and know exactly what they want to do, and sometimes those people have trouble putting a plan in place to achieve those goals. So they might need more support in that problem-solving planning area. And so this assessment is a way to kind of get at that. So if they're scoring high in agentic action, they probably will need less support to figure out what it is that they want to do. They'll be able to kind of figure that out on their own. But if their volitional action score is lower, you know that they might need help, like getting started enacting a plan or developing a plan or figuring out how to achieve those goals. So this is a nice way to, I mean, we use it in research, but it's also a nice way to think about what are those appropriate supports that a person might need. So it can be really useful in that way.
So Evan,
yeah.
On those, at the bottom I see the dotted lines. Do those also, like if you were in the website, you click on those, do those come up with the definitions of what those, like?
Yeah. So Stephanie's asking on this slide, underneath the volitional action and agentic action and action control beliefs, there's a dotted line. And I believe, don't have to go in and try this. So that's the enticement to try out the website. But I believe, yes, if you click on those, the definition of those will appear.
Of some, individuals who might be self-independent that are taking this on their own, and they may not know.
Yes. Yeah, and this also does come with a printed out sheet of the scores with definitions of everything and some ideas of appropriate or supports that may be appropriate in that area. So it's a nice tool for people to just a way to understand yourself better. And this, again, is not disability specific, so anybody can go in and generate these scores for themselves, and it might confirm things we know about ourselves or teach us something about ourselves too. So this is kind of what I was talking about. Yes, in-text definitions of essential characteristics. So there are those.
I mean, I have a hard time even pronouncing that word, so.
Yes, we do like our researchy terms, yeah. but they I'm trying to use those as little as possible. So as I said, there is also a parent or teacher report, whoever wants to fill that out. And you can get an idea of it's the same questions, but just kind of worded in a different way. So instead of asking, I have what it takes to reach my goals, the question on the parent or teacher report would ask that this student has what it takes to reach his or her goals. And I think it's a really important thing to note here that self-determination is a personal thing that's within a person. And it's very difficult to understand that from the outside. And so a lot of our research comparing young adult with disability perception of their self-determination and parent view of their self-determination is often different. And that's okay, but it's a perspective. But I think it's just important to realize if we're using this as a tool to figure out how to support somebody, I think it's just important to recognize who's filling it out and whose perspective that is. So we'll talk a little bit about how this looks for a transition to adulthood. And after we talk about this a little bit in theory here, I'll turn it over to Cassidy to provide some real-life examples too. So when we talk about employment in particular, which has been kind of an area of focus for me for a while, we can see that these are some of the key predictors of integrated employment after high school. So you can see self-determination is one of them that's at the top of the list, and we've talked about that a little bit already. But there's also things like parental expectation of employment, having experiences with chores and household responsibilities, and also a history of work. And I think those three things are really interesting because if we go back to those skills of self-determination that we talked about, like the problem solving and the goal setting and decision making and things like that, a lot of those things just kind of inherently happen in those other threes. In the there's a lot of opportunity built into doing chores. If parents are having expectation of work, it probably means that they're going out and doing volunteering stuff, or maybe doing some odd jobs or something around the home to kind of help develop those skills. But there's opportunities within each of those things to develop some of these skills related to self-determination. So I think all of these things are really important to just think about as kids are getting older, how are we building in some of these opportunities and also expectations for these things, and holding kids to a high expectation. So related to that, when we want to kind of intervene and think about ways that we can develop self-determination, knowing that it can lead to better employment outcomes and independent living outcomes, we've developed a intervention model that we use. It's been used a lot in schools, and then we've started now we're using it in the community, in a community context related to employment. So it's called the Self-Determined Career Development Model. The school-based version is the Self-Determined Learning Model of Instruction. We also like long names. These you can also find more information about from that self-determination.org. There's a lot of information out there about these. But the idea behind this is that you support a person to set a goal, develop an action plan to achieve the goal, and then reflect on what it is that they've learned. Are they moving closer to the goal or not? So a quick example of someone that I've worked with on this, I worked with a young adult who was a junior. He was 17, so he was a junior about to become a senior, but had dropped out of high school. So he dropped out, not for academic reasons, but he just had trouble navigating the social aspects of school. So he had dropped out. But he also read college-level textbooks on paleontology. So he had a real strong interest in learning more about these things and had aptitude where he could go to college, but he had dropped out of high school. So, having that long-term goal of going to college, it opened up a lot of room to set some kind of smaller goals that he could work to achieve to move him closer to that. And he was one of those guys who was very good at setting goals and knew exactly what he wanted to do, but putting that plan in place is where he needed a little more support. So this model became really useful for him to kind of think about a structure that he could use. So each of these phases is divided into a 4-question problem-solving sequence. So for him, phase 2 is about taking action. So he had a goal, set a goal to. We narrowed down the goal from getting into college to taking the GED. So within that, he had to. Develop a plan about what did he know about it now. Well, he didn't really know where he could take the test or access materials, or he didn't know if he could pass the test. So there were a lot of these things. So we set a goal around taking practice tests to increase his score to a point that he would be satisfied with, and talk through a lot about what satisfied to him would mean and things like that. And then we had kind of adjusted the goals as we went along. So the neat thing for him about that is that, we were taking practice tests, and we were, so then we decided that we were going to meet at the library instead of at his home to do that. So he was in the context where he could practice, where he could take the class, and it just opened up a whole lot of resources for him. But it was really kind of a way to just help him think through what are those steps that he needs to take to do that. And so the other, let's see. Okay, so really what we're talking about with the SDCDM is that it's a teaching model. So we're supporting people to set these goals and work to achieve these goals, and that's great, and we want to do that. But really, what we're trying to do is teach this problem-solving model that people can use in other aspects of their life. So the model is designed to be used over and over. So you don't just set a goal and achieve and you're done, but you set goals over a year, set and achieve multiple goals and keep working towards those to keep that model fresh in your mind and ingrained. So I also teach in the occupational therapy department at KU. And so when I'm talking to students about this, I have them think about, and so you can kind of relate this to yourself too, but think about if you're in school, so the students are in school, so that's an easy one. But also think about the job that you have and how you came about getting that job. So you might, maybe you had another job before, and you were thinking, I really need a change. And so your goal may be changing your job. But then you have to think about, okay, what do I know about changing my job? Well, it would affect my benefits. I'd have to figure out what the job market is. I would have to figure out if I need any new skills to do this other thing that I want to do. And all those, so just in the goal setting phase, those are things that we're all thinking about because we've had experiences doing this before. Those are things that we're thinking about and making a list to do. But those are all kind of part of this problem-solving model, thinking about what's our long-term goal, what do we know about it, and what are some smaller steps that we can use to achieve that goal, and also what are some barriers that are going to get in our way. And so then we put plans in place to address those barriers. So I'll give a quick example and then I'll turn it over to Cassidy. So this is someone that I've worked with. This was an adult with an intellectual disability who wanted to become a nail technician. So I was working with her and I didn't know a whole lot about being a nail technician. But it was something that she really wanted to do. So so in that kind of goal setting phase, that what do you know about it now, none of us really knew much about it, but it was something that she wanted to do because she had experience painting people's nails. She spent most of her day in a day program and didn't have a whole lot of opportunity to explore the community or socialize with people outside of the program. But one of the things that they did during the day was do nails, and she really liked doing that. So we found a cosmetology school down the street that gave, you could go in, they had a free clinic where you could go in and get your nails done, and they also had a recruiter in the office next door because that's where the classrooms were too. So we took a day, we went down, she had her nails done, she talked to some of the students about their experiences in the program, and then talked to the recruiter also. So we came to find out that there's a lot of anatomy and physiology and chemistry that you have to know to be a nail technician. So what we did while we're there, so I was supporting her to find all this out. In my mind, I'm thinking, I don't think I could pass this test because I didn't have a lot of that information. But I wasn't there to tell her that. I was there for her to figure out what she needed to do to accomplish her goal. So we got a copy of the practice test and we took it home so that we could so that was all about the goals. So the goal setting phase was about passing the entrance test. And then we put an action plan in place to practice the practice test to determine what support she needed to be successful with that. As we were working through the practice exam, she came to the realization that she hadn't had exposure to the science content in school, and it was going to take her a very long time to learn that information. And she wanted a job faster than that. So, over the course of several conversations, when we went to the self-evaluate and reflecting phase, she wanted to change her goal. She wanted to set a different goal besides being a nail technician because it was just going to take too long. But it opened up. So this is a really good example that we can talk a lot about. People set goals and don't always achieve those goals. And if we can think about in our own lives, we usually learn more about the goals that we set than we don't achieve than the goals that we do achieve, because it helps us just figure out other routes to go. And that was true for this woman too. So we were able to have conversations with her about what was it really about being a nail technician that you liked. And so she said that was the only time in her week that she really got to just visit one-on-one with somebody. And they got to do the nails, and it was just a really intimate experience that she had, and she really liked that. And that's why she wanted to be a nail technician. So it was a really interesting way to approach it. If we had gone in and said, there's no way you can be a nail technician, you can't pass this test, she would still want to be a nail technician. But by supporting her to put this plan in place and reflect on that, and coming to the realization that it was really about that one-on-one contact that she really valued, that opened up a whole lot more job opportunities and ways to think about employment for her that would satisfy that need and that she had. So we ended up finding her a job, working through the SDCDM a few more times. We found a job in an office where she could be a receptionist and kind of help people get to the rooms where they needed to go and settle in and visit with them and all that. So it ended up being a really nice way to kind of work through that process with her. And now I'm going to turn it over to Cassidy to hear some other examples from a parent perspective.
Thank you, and thank you for all of that great information. I am excited to be here, and it's definitely Evan has been somewhat of a mentor for me in the development, in my own development of understanding self-determination. So it's very exciting for me to be here with him to share a family's perspective about how to help your child develop their own self-determination. So just to give you some background, I first learned about self-determination when I was participating in a parent advocacy training that was like an IEP training. And I remember the person that was talking explaining this concept and thinking to myself, what in the world is this person talking about? And it wasn't Evan. So it was not Evan. But to me, it was very abstract. It was very intangible, and I wasn't really sure how I was going to use this information. But the one thing that I did understand is that it was important. And I got the idea that if I really, this was a really nice way that I could help my children if I could understand it. So I took a step back and I focused on, and the slide's not up, but I focused on those related skills because that was something that I could wrap my head around. I could wrap my head around the fact that choice making was important for my children, and the idea that helping them set a goal and create a plan was going to help them improve with their initiation, because that's something that both of them have difficulty with, is just even initiating certain tasks. So we made a really conscious effort to build these things into our day with, throughout the various things that we were doing. It was anything from giving my nonverbal child choices on what he wants to do for his evening activity, or giving him choices on what order he wants to complete his chores in. For my 11-year-old at the time, that looked different because we could have a conversation about what setting a goal meant and what was involved in setting a goal and creating an action plan. So this can look very different depending on the child. All of this kind of came to a really cool situation where it was right after Christmas, and my 12-year-old or 11-year-old came to me and he said, "Mom, when I go back to school, my goal is to not have to go to Resource anymore." And Resource is where he receives his special education services. So as a parent, of course, I'm, taken back because he's saying he doesn't want special education services. So I asked him what he meant and asked him to clarify. And really what it came down to was he was sick of being pulled out of the classroom. He wanted to be with his peers, and he felt like being pulled out was more hurtful than helpful. And he was able to articulate that when he was pulled out for special education services, when he went back to the classroom, he didn't know what had gone on. And he felt lost, and he felt like he was catching up. And ultimately, all he wanted to do was just be with his peers. And the question that he asked me that I will never forget is he said, "Mom, I know I need help, but I don't understand why I can't get that help with my friends in the room." And that was such a profound question. And I said, "You know what, buddy, you're right. That's a great question, and we're going to work through this together." So his IEP was coming up, and this was the IEP that we would use to transition him to middle school. So we created a plan of his goal was to no longer have to leave the classroom or receive any kind of special education services away from his peers. And he created a nice video on how he wanted to be supported. And that was a question that nobody had ever asked him. Nobody ever asked him, how do you want to be helped? So we worked on this video together, and then I took this video to his IEP meeting. And to his IEP team, the idea that this child, who was receiving a significant amount of support in a special education setting, now wanted to be mainstreamed. Needless to say, they weren't happy with me. They were not excited about this idea. As cute as Preston's video was, there was a lot of pushback, but I followed my gut and I wanted to see this through for Preston. So with the educator, or with the principal, telling me this wasn't what my child needed, this wasn't the best way to support him, that was hard, because this was an educator that I respected, and he was telling me I wasn't doing what was best for my kid. But I stuck to my guns, and we went into middle school with him going to all of the services, going to regular education, or being received in the regular education setting. And we worked through those 3 steps. We created a goal, we established an action plan, and then throughout this year, we've had to revisit that. We've had to have conversations about, are you getting the help that you need? How are you advocating for the help that you need? And we sat down for his IEP just a couple weeks ago, and it was almost 1 year to the day. And what we had in front of us was very nice data that showed that he not only performed better academically, but socially and emotionally, all of these measures that we use to measure his progress towards his IEP goals, he performed better across the board when he received his services in the regular education setting. So I was not only able to tell the principal I told you so, which is always fun for a special needs parent to be able to tell an educator I told you so, but I was able to go home and tell Preston that he was right and that he advocated for himself and he saw his plan through, and that resulted in him doing better at school, which is important to him, but him also having a more fulfilling social life. And I think that that's really a nice depiction of that whole process. Something else that as we were working through this was just the idea that this can be scary, and it feels like you're giving your child control when maybe they don't have some of those skills that you would normally give to a child that kind of control to. So there's that ambiguity, and it can be very uncomfortable and very nerve-wracking. And I think that as special needs parents, we get really used to driving the bus. We're good at driving the bus. We like driving the bus. That's where we're comfortable. And it comes from a place of, I want to protect my child. I want to help my child. So the idea of giving them more control when you're not sure if they can manage that control, that can be hard. So what I would say to that is, instead of thinking about it as letting your child drive the bus, think about it as driving the bus together, and that you collectively are coming together with your child to set a goal, no matter what that goal is. And you are, as a team, working together to help your child achieve that goal. That, I think, is the best description or best analogy that I can give of the practice of self-determination.
Great.
Are there any questions?
So I'm assuming he's still...
Yes.
After 1 year.
Uh-huh.
What did the IEP team say this last year? You know, they kind of fought it and
Yeah.
they were on board, but what did they say?
Everybody was very excited, and it was definitely one of those moments where they recognized that they had pushed back, but ultimately this was the best thing for him, and they could really see that. And everybody's excited about his progress now, of course, because he's doing great.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other thing that, and we can get into this when we have a discussion about it, but just the difference between being able to, because I think about developing self-determination kind of like play. Like, my child, both of my kids, struggled with play in early childhood. That was something that neither of them did, but it's a very natural thing. So self-determination, and Evan spoke to this, is something that you naturally develop typically in middle school, junior high, high school. That's the time when most people start developing those skills and really exercising them. And so I think about some of this intervention similar to what you would do with a child who wasn't developing play skills, is you're giving them the support that they need to develop this very natural skill set.
I just think it's amazing that he was so successful, and I really hope that it opens the eyes of, not just for Preston, but for others, for them to say, oh, this worked really well for Preston. Maybe it'll work for little Johnny and little Susie too. And so that they're more apt to be open-minded.
Right. It's not easy. I mean, as a parent to let my 11-year-old tell me that he didn't want special education services anymore, I mean, that was crazy. And my husband was like, what are you doing? But it wasn't about removing those services. It was about asking him how he wanted to be supported. And and even going through the thought process of, what if this fails? Okay, well then we'll figure it out. And we can say we tried, and we can work through that whole process of, okay, this was your goal. Why didn't it work? What supports do you need? How do you want to be supported? So there's a lot. Definitely that was the best case scenario, but there's a lot of directions that we could have taken that if it wouldn't have worked out the way that I had hoped it was going to.
I'll tell you this, I'm a high school special ed teacher, and I have a student, I ask all my students to be very involved in their IP. So they're always, we talk about, one of these days you're going to run this meeting, or almost run. So they are extremely involved in committee meetings. But I've got a kid who's a freshman that has a personal IA with him. He is bound and determined that he's not going to have an IA next year. And so we begun backing away, explaining to Mom, his grades are likely to tank for a while and drop.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But we started backing away. We've taken away actually some extreme accommodations that were probably over-accommodating. Grades haven't dropped in a month and a half or so that we've been doing this. He's not cut loose, but we've moved away, and I think he feels better.
Yeah. Some of it's that natural control. I mean, Evan spoke to these are things that we all exercise naturally in our lives, and individuals with disabilities aren't given the same level of control in their life as individuals that don't have disabilities, and so that it's natural to want that. And so when I think there's a lot of these individuals that we support, that when you give them that control, you're surprised at what they are capable of doing. It's exciting.
I really like that question that you asked. How do you want to be supported?
Yeah.
That's a great way to give that ownership.
It is. Again, a lot of people with developmental disabilities, nobody ever thinks to ask them that. Yeah, we do.
It's on the borderline of should we have him in regular classes, should we have him in more pull-out resource classes? We put him there as a freshman and in reg ed classes, and thought he would probably struggle. He didn't struggle as much as we thought he would. He's still got some very significant issues and weaknesses.
Right.
I'm able to paraphrase what somebody else has said, and abstractness, but he can do work.
Yeah.
And so now I'm thinking that there's probably not much chance we're going to even consider moving him out into pull-out classes for next year at all.
Which that's really exciting.
Well, yes, and it's still going to be a big struggle for him. He's struggling and having more success than he would have if he was in a resource room.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you. How are the parents feeling about this when you made these changes?
Parent was supportive.
Both of them?
Mom is always in the picture.
But were you talking about two different individuals, or this is the same individual?
Same kid.
Sorry, I thought you were talking about a different. So mom is supportive. That's great.
and understanding that she was under, I made it clear, made sure she understood that as we back away, we may struggle more and grades may drop. And we will make sure they don't drop very far. But he needs to learn how to struggle, and if he's frustrated and struggles, then that's okay.
Absolutely. We all do. I mean,
Absolutely.
I struggled in high school and there was no support for me. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, I just had to figure,
But I think he's having more success than we thought he might have.
That's great.
Yeah.
Really good.
That's great. So how much, maybe we talk about like Cassie's question, asking her son, what kind of supports how do you want to be supported? Like how much say did he have in like the supports that you're backing away, like which supports? Or is that more of your guys' decision?
Typically adults sit down and make all these decisions for their students. And, again, not that I necessarily always do it all right, but we talk to the kids. I have pre-meetings with the kids before a couple of weeks. We sit down and start talking. We go through the IP, word for word, section by section. And
That's
say,
amazing.
I love that.
And say,
Yeah.
Does this still represent you or not? And the kid will say, I don't do that anymore. That's not true anymore. Yeah, I still struggle with this. This is still a problem for me. And so we go into the meeting with an edited version of the IEP that the student and I have sat down and made changes on. Never had a parent disagree or argue with it.
That's
That's
amazing,
great.
though, that you sit down with them and start going through that IEP and getting their thoughts and opinions. My son, he graduated 5 years ago this month, next week. But I know they never did that with him. Asking, he was at the IEP meeting and he got to put input into it, but he just kind of sat there and listened to all of us talk and didn't really, if he had had that one-on-one like you do, it's pretty, I think that helps them understand too that somebody really does care what I think about my IEP and my future. So
Yeah.
kudos. I like that idea.
I'm just thinking, I'm liking this conversation, but are they getting it online? Do we want to have?
Nobody's saying anything that they're not.
If
hearing.
Cassie and I kind of sit
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
there, can we?
Do we have
pass
two
the
microphones?
microphone around as
You
we're
can just
talking?
bring it
Okay.
over here.
I did want to add one more story to tell related to parents, because I think all these are really good experiences, and I really liked what Cassidy said about kind of thinking about co-creating the goal, co-driving the bus. Because I had one experience where, so we were going into to people's homes and helping the young adults set goals related to employment. And we had this kid we were working with who was adamant that he wanted his goal to be to start a dog walking business, which I thought was great. So we were happy to set that. And so we kind of had the session set up to where we'd work with the young adult for the first 45 minutes and then have the parents come in afterwards. So we kind of report out and talk about it and plan. And so we did that. And so we were all excited about this goal and, kind of creating some action steps for it. And the guy is telling his mom about it. And her response was, "Oh, really? That's funny because he's terrified of dogs." Like, oh, okay. So, so I mean, I think Cassidy brings up a very good point that we definitely want the young adult to be driving the bus, but sometimes there are times where it's very appropriate to have input from parents too and kind of co-drive the bus.
I liked what she said about focusing on interdependence and not independence, because I think it's very easy to get caught up on the idea that, well, my child can't do that because they can't do it alone. Well, they don't have to do it alone.
Yeah.
Let's, we can bring in supports so that they are successful at whatever level they need.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think for us in that instance, the feedback from his mom, we didn't really change the goal because that was the goal that the kid wanted to set, but we changed the action plan that we put in place. So instead of, starting to create this business, we're like, well, the first goal is going to be that you're going to go over to your cousins and you're going to just play with the dogs that they have and see if you really like that. And so then we could kind of reflect on that. Turns out he just really didn't like dogs, so we kind of had to start over after that. But it was still something that I think, and I think one of the things that the young adult learned is that we were taking him seriously, and we were really invested in him setting the goal and trying things out. So I think it was useful.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm just going to put up one more slide while we're having the conversation because and I'll just kind of leave this up while we're having the conversation. But just some things to think about for families to probably maybe enhance practices, but also think about the practices that you're doing that are really supportive. There's a lot of research that shows a lot of these things that we've been talking about providing opportunities for choice, listening to youth's perspective, which we've had some really good examples of. And supporting problem solving, all leading to higher academic performance and fewer challenging behaviors. So a lot of this research was actually done in the just kind of general population. So it wasn't really disability specific, but I think we've been hearing stories about a lot of parallels to that. And then ways of supporting, like around setting clear expectations, and appropriate levels of support, as we said, and constructive feedback and opportunities to fail, and just how much we all learn from that. Yeah. So, but are there, so now we can, should we just sit on these chairs up here and pass the microphone?
They're not hearing some of the questions.
Oh, okay, great. So we can kind of pass it around.
Is there questions online?
Except for is there a place for online listeners to find the slides? So I'm going to tell them to email me.
I like you.
So I'd like to think about, does anybody have any thoughts or anything as we start the discussion?
I don't. No, I think it's, yeah.
Yeah, so we've heard some good examples about how, and I don't know how much of it came up, but one of our audience members is a high school special education teacher who talked about his experience with a student who also wanted to be supported in the general education classroom, and how they worked through a process over a year or so.
This freshman year.
Okay.
School year.
To work over the process over a year to kind of start reducing the supports, special education supports that were already in place, to really figure out what that ideal combination is and how the kid thrived when he was in that general education setting more. And so I'm just kind of interested to hear people's perspectives on especially these ideas of providing opportunity. And are there, how do you, I think it's really interesting to think about, how do you decide when to provide more opportunity for a kid, or to maybe change how you're supporting them to support them becoming who they are?
I think about how do you, what comes to mind with that is, obviously, if the individual starts asking for those things, that's a very natural time to do that. But what if you have a nonverbal child, like I do, and he's 14 and a half. We want him to develop these skills, but if he's not demonstrating any behavior that would lead us in that direction, how do we help him develop that? And it really came down to choice making and giving him opportunities to make choices, and then looking at his behavior and letting that kind of help us, okay, he's really obviously not liking this situation, because we're looking at different employment settings for him. So going to different places and looking at the way that he's reacting in those situations with his behavior, with his mood, and really using those things to help guide us, because making sure that you're developing these skills in even the most impacted individuals is just as important as the individuals who can self-advocate and express what they want to do.
I think it's a really good point. And, a lot of the research that's been done and the models that have been created are very verbal models that we're relying on verbal feedback from kids and things like that. But I think you're absolutely right that while we mostly use those models with kids who can provide verbal feedback, I think these questions can be answered also through observing behavior and really understanding how the person communicates and being willing to really listen to that. So I think that's a great example. You guys have other thoughts related to that?
We did get someone who said that this has been helpful information. Heather Trignago, you might know her name. She said, "Thank you for this opportunity to listen in on Facebook. It's been very helpful." So some great information.
Thanks, Heather.
I think maybe just where can families get more? I'm just thinking, because we know that Stephanie is the one that kind of created this opportunity for parents to interact online, which is great because a lot of us are busy, and this is a way for them to access this information. But I think about what we can leave them with that would where they can get more information or more support, especially if they're interested in maybe some of the teaching models. I know you mentioned the SelfDetermination.org, which Stephanie linked in the comments.
I did.
But if they needed coaching, I know that there's research opportunities and things like that. So did you want to speak to any of that?
Yes, there are some research opportunities available, and I believe there's contact information on the SelfDetermination.org website. But you can also search for me through KU. Just search for Evan Dean at KU. You can find me, and I'll be happy to link you to more opportunities for research. So one of the things that we've been listening to parents as we've been working in the community, and I think there are a lot of these tools that parents can use, but we also need to recognize that we're working with young adults, and I think lots of times young adults don't necessarily want to receive this kind of support from their parents, which I think is absolutely age appropriate. So if we can help with that, we will. So
I would definitely agree with that. My 23-year-old. I was just saying I would definitely agree with that because my 23-year-old at home, I can tell him anything and doesn't listen, but having someone outside, like he has an education coordinator because currently he's at Johnson County Community College, and he has an education coordinator, and I don't know that I want to share this online because he may see this, but if I want something to happen, I kind of talk with her and see if she'll go back around and bring it to him. And he'll come home and he'll say, "Oh, I did that." Well, like he did your research project, the one from last year, and his goal was to get his driver's permit again. And I completely supported him and said, but he didn't want to do it with me beforehand. But then when he worked with one of your students, he got his permit, and he's now driving. He got his driver's license last November at the age of 23. So we also had others helping him learn to drive as well because mom couldn't do it. But you're absolutely right in that area.
And I'm sorry you can't use that strategy anymore of talking to his teacher, but it was good while it lasted.
Yeah. Well, he's going away to school They'll have an academic specialist down there too. So it'll be nice. So what school district do you work for?
North Kansas City.
North Kansas City.
Did you email me earlier today?
Yes,
Okay.
I think I've connected. It was you.
Okay, good.
I'm just communicating with you.
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Great. So what brought you here today?
Actually, I think it was one of my students' parents connected me with the summit organization that you're in, and a while back, and I thought I looked into that, and this is and this came up at some point on there. So it's an interest that just something I've been interested in, getting more involved into helping kids get from high school out into the work environment, and so that
Helping them drive the bus to do that. It sounds like.
Yeah.
Not literally, figuratively.
Yeah, but yeah, making sure that when they leave my program or our program, that they're going to be able to have some success after school. And all my kids, my whole caseload is kids with autism at some level or another. So that's where my interest came in.
Great.
There is a question online.
Okay.
It says, have you explored any opportunities for peer-to-peer mentoring in self-determination development?
I was just going to speak to that.
You want to speak to it?
So Summit Future Foundation, to address the question about peer-to-peer mentoring with the development of self-determination, that is something that we do within the programming at Summit Future Foundation. Is that peer component is so important, and for them to see their peers setting goals, and then they're more motivated to set goals, and you're taking a lot of the professional, everybody telling them what they should be doing. We're taking a lot of that out and letting the peers naturally support themselves like they would in any other environment.
That's great. And probably you should also mention that Summit Future Foundation is a good place to go for more information also.
And we use the SDCDM. So.
Yeah. The other thing that I'd say, oh, sorry.
Are you familiar with the organization, the Girls Night Out program?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, the young lady that developed that was my student.
Renee?
No, the Faith.
Oh, really? Oh, cool.
Well, Faith.
You know Faith.
Yes, we do know Faith. Faith was the one who came with us to AUCD in November and presented with Renee
Oh, cool.
and Jessica Shuttler, who is watching this tonight.
That's great.
Yeah. So that's a fantastic organization for girls and women.
I was going to
Yes.
there's some information over there about Girls Night Out if you want to take it back
Yep.
to the school, but you seem to know about it already.
So for people online, if you're not hearing the conversation, Girls Night Out, which is run through the Center for Human Child
Center for Child Health and Development.
Health and Development, Center for Child Health and Development, thank you, CCHD, is another opportunity to get some support for these things around self-determination. But the question was about peer support. So the other thing that I was going to add is that people have used the self-determined learning model of instruction, which is the same process that we've been talking about here in a couple of different contexts. One is around setting exercise and health-related goals using peer models also. So the peers and the young adults with disabilities are setting their own goals and then kind of working together to achieve those goals, which I think is a really cool way to do it. They're also in classrooms. They're kind of starting to use the model more in general education classrooms with kids with disabilities in the classroom also. So everybody's kind of receiving the same instruction on how to set goals and develop action plans and things like that. So
If you had, well, I was thinking you could also use it to set a goal to have more friends. If you have a child who is wanting more of that social interaction, you can help them go through the process of establishing that they want larger peer group, and where are they, and then taking action, where are you going to find those peers, and when you're interacting with those peers, what is that experience like? And I know we're talking about these models, and they're great teaching models, but as a parent, even just having that language in the conversations that you're having, what is your goal? How do you plan to, make that happen? And what barriers, or, what happened when you did those things? There's a very natural way to, build that into your day.
Yeah. Speaking to that too, with my young kids, I kind of talk this about my setting goals and putting action plans in place too. So I use this language related to me, so that they're hearing about that also, and then kind of picking up on some of that and talking about how I do it and how I fail and regroup and things like that. So it's another kind of form of modeling that parents can use also.
It's great that they get to see you fail sometimes too. Not that, nobody likes to fail, and I'm not trying to highlight that, but it's good that your kids see you fail so that they know it's okay, that you're picking it back up and you're moving on, and then you're successful at the next goal.
Right. And we talk about fail like it's a bad thing, but I've heard somebody call it flirting. Learning from failure. But I think there's this negative context of failure, but really it's another opportunity to learn more about ourselves. So I don't really think about failure in negative terms usually.
In some ways, I've learned more from my failures than I have from my successes.
Right. Yeah. I also did not give my kids access to the Facebook Live site for this, though, so they can't watch this.
Yeah, I've also learned more from my failures than my successes, and learned from my frustrations. I wouldn't be here doing this if I hadn't learned from failures and frustrations.
Great. Well, any other questions or anything online?
No, the only other comment was from, again, Jessica Shuttler saying that they loved having faith in GNO and as a co-presenter. So thanks for the shout out for that.
So in the last couple of minutes, I would just encourage everybody online and everybody here too to really think about what is one way that whether you have kids with disabilities or not, what's one way that one practice you can use to help instill self-determination that you might be able to put in place in the next couple of weeks to just kind of move your thoughts forward a little bit about it.
Well, if someone can tell me how to get my son to be self-determined, how to pack his room up for a move, come on over. That's really my only focus right now for the next couple of weeks.
Stephanie's saying that packing his room to get ready for the move might be the way related to that.
Yeah, we gotta figure that out. That's funny.
So,
yeah. Awesome.
Great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. And it's been a great conversation here in Kansas City, and we'll anxious to hear people's feedbacks and thoughts about this.
Thanks.
You, Evan.